everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Seth Schachner, the managing director of Strat Americas. Seth, thank you so much for joining me.
Great to be here, Brittany.
There's some big news in the years-long TikTok saga. The White House and China have officially reached a deal regarding the app. This comes almost 2 years after President Biden signed a bill forcing the app's parent company, Bytedance, to either sell TikTok's U.S. operations to an American-approved buyer or effectively face a nationwide ban. The agreement that was recently reached gives a group of Trump-backed investors control of the U.S. version of TikTok. So to start off the conversation, what do you make of the deal?
Long time coming, essentially a positive thing, actually. I think there's been just a long blitz of political considerations around the TikTok transaction, sometimes kind of outweighing the actual reality of it, basically. And I guess I'm kind of glad to see that it's over, basically. And the real thing that I make about the deal is, what, if anything, will change in terms of the product long term? Because I think that's always been, the most sensitive underlying piece of it. Users need to like it, be happy, and not sense that the environment has been compromised in some way. So, but yeah, a good deal. I don't see something radically different in terms of the change of control. To be honest with you, in terms of why the deal eventually, happened, basically. I think it's about bilateral rivalries ultimately.
I think to get started, let's talk about who's who in this deal. The new U.S. operation is called TikTok USDS Joint Venture. It's now majority owned by Trump-supported investors. These investors include Oracle, the private equity firm Silver Lake, and the Abu Dhabi-based investment firm MGX. What are your thoughts on these investors?
I don't know if I would call them Trump-backed per se. I think, these are classic private equity investors and have all sorts of, asymmetrical relationships around the world in terms of investments, basically. But yeah, I do think that it's certainly more palatable in kind of the current, domestic political landscape to see an American group of investors owning this, particularly around the data sensitivities that I think were part of the reason why this transaction happened. But I don't know if I'd call them politically aligned per se, to be really quite candid with you. I think the real thing is that the app will be under some form of American control in terms of the ownership aspect of it. And hopefully it'll be like something that users don't know. It'll be transparent to them, although it's not clear that's actually happening right now since it was sold.
What do you mean by that? Let's dive a little deeper here. So maybe Trump-backed isn't exactly correctly, or Trump-supported, Trump-approved. Is that how you would describe these investors then?
No, to be honest, I don't mean to be difficult. I think there was a strong bilateral and also bipartisan set of concerns around TikTok all along. And it to me, it has always risen above both parties, to be honest with you, because the Biden administration was struggling to figure out what to do about TikTok and took a lot of different measures, whether it was in the courts or different arms of our government, including something called CFIUS, to try and deal with it. And so the can kind of got kicked down the road. I don't think there's a huge amount of differentiation in terms of the political parties in terms of how this thing actually gets looked at. So I would kind of push back a little bit on that definition, basically. The real thing is about American data security. And if we allow, foreign-owned social media companies that are, adversaries to track us, to have lots of data. And I think that's what was ultimately driving this, basically. And I think there were different arms of our government that were looking at it, not just Biden or Trump, but CFIUS, which is a bipartisan a congressional committee that looks at foreign investments, that have looked at lots of things in the past, by the way, healthcare apps for different social media groups as well. I think it's ultimately about protecting us, actually. So
I want to talk about those national security concerns because ByteDance still owns 19.9% of a stake in this venture. What do you make of that? Because critics wanted ByteDance to separate because the main concern here was that ByteDance could be compelled to give the CCP sensitive data from American users. How do we know that the CCP won't be able to access this data?
you probably don't ultimately, to be honest with you, because I think one of the ripples, what I saw in terms of the new structure, look, I mean, Brittany, this is a big technological operation that originated in a foreign country. And so there's got to be lots of nuances that any acquisitor or buyer would have to learn from the owner that's actually selling it. And I think even today, when I looked at some of the terms in terms of the products, I don't know if it's really a perfect thing in terms of having every little pathway sealed off, basically. So I would bet it probably isn't a perfect set of circumstances, but I think the real thing is that there is a new operation. It's owned, controlled by, and hosted by, American entities from Oracle to others that would presumably be servicing it as well. And I think that's longer term in everyone's interest, basically. When I look at it, I think, probably China said we're going to make a conciliatory move and agree to license our algorithm to an American ownership group to keep the enterprise alive. And I'm hoping that will be a constructive template for actually future business, not just around social media. So I view it as a good thing. It's probably imperfect if that's what you're driving at.
What does this mean, though? Does this mean that the joint venture is operating completely separately from TikTok, that it's has the same name as TikTok, but it's two separate things, that there's still, because Bytedance still has a stake in this, it's still TikTok? I mean, what exactly does that mean?
It probably means all those things, basically, because I think, yes, it's a new entity. It's a creative entity. I have a lot of friends over there. I haven't asked them how the staffing and organization works. I wouldn't really want to know, because I imagine there's a whole dust cloud over there going on in terms of who's going to work on what. So I would imagine there'll be a new enterprise that is almost forcibly kept separate, but I still think there'll be technological dependencies in terms of the operations of this thing, meaning that the Americans or the American enterprise is still going to need to know everything about how the tech and the app works, basically, to make it interoperable and smooth for users. And they're going to have to rely to some degree on Bytedance, who's still part of this. So I think there's going to be a bunch of gray areas in there, as this thing moves forward.
And this is going to be governed, the U.S. version, by a 7-member majority American board of directors. But one of these directors is the CEO of TikTok. What do you make of that?
I think it's understandable in any governance structure. Again, imperfect, not pure. There's a new U.S. CEO that's been anointed here who comes from a media background. But I think even in big American multinationals, when we're abroad, we still have American representation on localized boards or governance structures, whether that's in regional offices or operations. So understandable, not perfect for sure, but understandable.
And why people like TikTok so much, one of the reasons, A, aside from it being very addicting, B, the algorithm feeds you videos. They curate it just for you. So your For You page is different than X or Y or Z or your friend's For You page. I'm curious, how exactly will the algorithm change here? Because this joint venture announced it will retrain, test, and update the algorithm.
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I actually think that's the most important issue here. And I think it will need to be retrained on whether it's American content or other models. And I think from the initial reports that I'm seeing from users, there's been electrical outages, there's been all sorts of stuff that's going wrong with the app actually in the transition, and view counts have gone down to 0 in some cases, and people are starting to see content that's wholly irrelevant to what they want to see. So you hope over time, as it gets retrained, it becomes more relevant, basically. There's also, by the way, this lawsuit that was just announced that they settled today in terms of the addictive aspects of some of these algorithms. So I think there's going to be a whole lot of change in front of not just TikTok, but some of these other entities in terms of how the markets look at these algorithms. I've always been a big fan of what I'd call moderation, meaning that I think there should be some human editors and human interfaces in there looking at every one of these things to see not just that the content's relevant, but it's not harmful. I'm a big believer in that. And so I'm hopeful that that'll be part of at least the American operation going forward, along with the new algorithm.
Do you think that lawsuit and that settlement there will play a role here at all? Because when you're on social media, I mean, you can just be scrolling and not realize an hour or two goes by, just the addictive nature of that. Do you think that they will then have to make an effort to make their apps, make their algorithm perhaps less addictive?
I hope so. I mean, I hope that whether it's Section 230 that's been, gotten a lot of congressional attention here in the US, a lot of media attention, or it's just human management of these algorithms, they've obviously had very bad consequences. And I think it's fair to say that all the tech titans have really struggled with their responses to it, basically. And so, yeah, I hope that a new algorithm, as well as renewed attention to moderation in Section 230, makes these places safer, particularly for younger people, basically. So I do hope so. I don't know if it will, but I hope so.
Fingers crossed. I hope so as well, too. And I think we can all hope for that. But let's say I didn't watch this conversation between you and I. I'm someone who didn't see the headlines of TikTok having a new deal with the United States. There's a new U.S. entity. If I'm the average TikTok user, will I notice a difference? Do you think, or do you think that it's too early to tell? That still remains to be seen.
I would hope that they don't, because the more transparent it is, the better it'll be for users, basically. It's definitely going to be different in my view, because if they're really going to retrain the algorithm and they're spinning it off, it will look different, basically. So, I would hope that would be the case. And I think if it isn't the case and it winds up being something that, I don't know, is whitewashed or too moderated for people, then you might see competitors coming in and washing them away. I worked for an app years ago called America Online that at the time was like the coolest thing that brought America onto the internet, and it got washed away by different competitive forces. It wasn't that we were doing things wrong; it just happened that others came in and took the space. And so I would, I don't know if that'll happen here, but my view is that these things should be subject to market forces, and hopefully different generations will either adopt it, or you'll see better things come along that that take the place of it.
I know that we talked earlier in this conversation about the national security concerns regarding data, but there were other national security concerns. Some were concerned that the Chinese government could control the algorithm and spew propaganda or try to influence U.S. elections at all. Do you have any national security concerns right now after you've seen the news about this new U.S. entity?
I think the concerns were always legitimate, and this is an app very specifically that had a lot of congressional attention. The Biden administration and the Trump administration made multiple attempts to figure out what to do with it, whether it was shutting it down or spin it off. And I don't have any inside information. I just know it was publicly reported, but I think there was a reason why it got so much attention, whether that was their responses in the congressional hearings, or maybe they did track some people. But I don't think that the concerns were unrealistic, basically. So I think those are legitimate concerns. I will also tell you, I don't know how different the data grants are for TikTok versus all the other social medias. I don't think they actually are all that different at the end of the day. I think younger people are willing to give more and more of their data and their privacy away to be part of these social forums. And so it's a real mixed set of circumstances for me on it. But I think it's positive that they figured out a structure, and hopefully the algorithm will be accurate and it'll still be fun for all the youth, because I don't think anyone wants to see it go away.
And then my last question to you is, what do you think is A, either missing from this conversation, or B, what specifically are you looking out for next when it comes to seeing what comes of this new TikTok deal?
Missing from the conversation, I think, is just the concern. I mean, the real thing that I would say is, TikTok's been actually a very positive force for a lot of industries. There's a lot of people who rely on it, whether they're influencers, or I know the TikTok enterprise is a business to support all sorts of small business enterprises. I also know it to be an emerging power in areas like media and entertainment that I work, as well as in advertising. And I think that has been a little bit underplayed given all these concerns that have come out politically for it. Maybe a little bit unfairly, maybe not. So I think that's the biggest thing, is that you have here something that 1 billion people are on around the world, basically, and there's a very positive aspect for younger generations, whether they use it for political or social expression, and every person can get on it. And I think that's probably the biggest thing to kind of keep in mind around all this corporate governance stuff that's going on, that may, at the end of the day, may not make not much of a difference. So.
And yeah, I mean, over 200 million Americans are users on TikTok. I mean, that's just such a huge, huge number. And especially when you think of, that's how a lot of Americans are getting their news. But Seth, I really appreciate you joining the conversation. Thank you so much for coming on. You're welcome back anytime.
Thanks a lot, Brittany. Great to be here.